This book changed my life. Okay, maybe not changed my life because that's really dramatic, but it did inspire a lot of my travels. I'm London Alexander, and I'm a writer. But to be a writer, you have to be an avid reader. I read a ton of books every month. A lot of them, most of them, are queer books. So I decided to make some videos to review some of these books. And if you like this kind of content or any of my travel videos, please like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments what you think of these reviews, or if you've read these books yourselves, let me know what you think of them. And if you'd like to join my Patreon, I do a monthly book club. At the beginning of the month, I'll introduce one of the books that I'm reading, and then towards the end of the month, we hop on Discord and discuss our thoughts about it. So Real Queer America is a LGBT travel book written by a trans woman. She's a journalist, and I love her writing. She writes so clear and entertaining, and also cites all of her sources, so I have so much more information to go and check, and she's obviously telling the truth about everything because the evidence is there. But what is she exactly doing in this book? Samantha grew up in a red state, and she's traveling around the US, similar to what I'm doing, but she is only sticking to the red states, or she's only visiting and writing about the red states. I know what you're probably thinking, because I thought the same thing. Having a trans woman explore the LGBTQ communities in red states sounds very dangerous. Samantha points out that it's important to go to these red states. That inspired a lot of my travels, because originally I was planning to just go to the blue states, the big meccas like Los Angeles and New York and Seattle, where the queer communities are really huge. But Samantha showed me that it doesn't benefit anyone to skip the red states. In fact, a lot of the red states have even stronger queer communities because they're not so big and they still rely on each other. There's a lot that I don't agree with Samantha on, but I think in general, especially about some of the red states, there's a lot that I do agree with, and I really like this quote by her. It says, "The queer communities there in the liberal states can be cliquey too, because people are spoiled for choice. In red states oases, I felt so much more adhesiveness between the L and the G and the B and the T." What that means is that a city like Los Angeles does get really cliquey, because the city is spoiled enough to be able to have a lesbian bar, a gay white bar, a bar for trans people, and those kind of very specific areas. Because a state like Texas, for example, their queer community still very much relies on each other, and it's still very much mixed in. All the letters of the LGBTQ plus community are together, rather than being spoiled and being able to have their own areas. Now, that's not to say that it's bad to have a separate lesbian bar or a queer bar. It's just a big privilege, and a lot of the bigger cities don't even realize that. Though it is something that we are actively fighting for, is to be able to integrate with the broader straight community, or just anyone in general, just be accepted. There are things that change with that. We lose some of the intimacy in our community spaces. Prides, for example, become full of straight people, especially in Los Angeles. Whereas the smaller town prides, like, let's say, Laramie, Wyoming, will have pretty much just queer people. There are some instances in this book where Samantha does poke fun at liberals, and that's kind of putting it in a nice way. But let's be real. Liberals do that to conservatives all the time. So I don't know if Samantha is liberal or conservative as far as like voting and politics. I do know she hates Trump, because the first chapter is called Being Queer in Trump's America. Now, this book came out in 2019, so in the middle of Trump's first presidency, and basically it documented the changes in the country as she's traveling and the new issues that she's had to deal with. Especially right then, I think, was the rise of a lot of anti-transgender laws. She has another part in here that I really like, She says, queerness itself is forever. It is everywhere, and it is irrefutably American. If you want to learn for yourself, all you have to do is get in the car and drive. I don't expect everybody to learn how queer America is by doing that, which is why I'm doing it. My entire project, Queer Across America, is about finding these queer communities all around the country and to show that wherever you are, there's a community for you. And I think Samantha was on the same path with that, except her focus was on red states. Although I didn't read this before my idea for traveling, it was one of the first books that I grabbed when I decided I was going to go on a trip, and I started ordering a bunch of road trip books. And because this one is queer, it was the closest to what I was already doing. Samantha goes on to talk about flyover states and how we can't learn what kind of communities are in those states if we keep flying over them. And to that point, it really bothers me when I tell someone what state I'm in or where I'm going and it's a rural place, and they immediately start bashing it. For example, I told one of my friends that I was in Nebraska, and they were like, "What? Why the f*** are you there?" Okay, that's a fair question, but that's a fair question for anywhere. But then they went on to say how terrible Nebraska was and how there was nothing to do out there and no queer communities. And so my response was, I didn't know that you had been there. Of course, they said they had never been there, so I don't know why people rely so much on the stereotypes and these beliefs without even exploring it or talking to someone who's from there. That really bothers me because I was guilty of it too. I have so many preconceived ideas of places that I go to, and then I learn just how different they are from those beliefs. But when a stereotype is out there and it's the only thing you know, you start believing it. And I think that goes for both liberals and conservatives, and that's one of the biggest problems that we have. So no, I don't think you should just go to Nebraska to prove to yourself that it's different what other people say. That might not be necessary, but I do think it is necessary to stop judging these places based on things from the past. Nebraska, Wyoming, Texas, the South have so many thriving queer communities that I'm documenting in my videos. So at the very least, to learn about these places or to learn that there is a queer community everywhere, take a look at some of them. Samantha even talks about like religion and other things similar to that as she's traveling through the red states. That's one of the things that I couldn't connect with because I just didn't grow up as religious as a lot of other people. I was raised Catholic up to a point, but it didn't really continue into even my teenage years or adulthood. So some of that stuff I know a lot of viewers can relate to growing up in Christian areas or Christian households, and I highly recommend this book, especially if you're one of those people. If you think that all is hopeless in red states as far as LGBTQ plus people, I highly suggest reading this book because it'll give you hope for the red states and the smaller rural areas. You'll be able to see a lot of the queer communities that Samantha visits, a lot of the LGBTQ centers, and just overall gives you a better feeling about the red states. I also suggest taking a look at some of her other work. I'll post a link to her website down below. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Actually, I could go on forever about it. Okay. When We Rise is my absolute favorite book of all time. That's not true. When We Rise is one of my favorite queer books of all time that completely inspired my activism and my role in the queer community. It's a memoir written by Cleve Jones, who has been an activist for pretty much all his life and worked very closely with Harvey Milk. A lot of this is centered in San Francisco, where I believe he still lives and is still very active in the queer community. This book was also made into a TV show or a limited series, I believe by the same name, When We Rise, and I also really liked it, though of course the book was better. But the show and the book highlights the struggles of minorities in America and how they're all related. So it talks about how female rights, black rights, and queer rights are all related, closely related. Without the help from each other, we're never going to overcome the white cis heteropatriarchy. Cleve talks about how the female minority, the black minority, and the queer minority kind of all had the revolutions around the same time. And many of those communities blend together. There's so much overlap between those three minorities. So having issues between the three of them and saying, that's not my issue, or trying to keep them all separate is impossible. Because they're all so closely related, and it requires the help of all of them and the community of all of them to overcome what we need to overcome. One of my favorite quotes in here is, when we weren't dancing or we were marching. And I think that's so deep, because there is so much fun and queer joy in the LGBTQ plus community, but when it's time to fight back, it's time to fight back. This happened in one of the nights that Cleve documents, where he says, they slowed down, they stopped running, they turned around and threw themselves against the cops. Skinny little sissy boys and big strong dykes, downtown office workers, Castro clones, leathermen, and lipstick lesbians, black and brown and white, and pushed back into the plaza. I think that's such a beautiful thing and really encapsulates the queer community, because we can have our own niche little groups within the community, but when we're fighting the larger evil that's trying to take away our rights, that's when we need to all come together and fight back. Every letter of the LGBTQ plus community doesn't need to have the same interests. The only thing that we all need to have in common is that we need to keep each other safe. So when the time calls for it, we need to band together. Whether it's voting, whether it's a march, whether it's fight against the police when they were doing raids back in the day. There are some ideas in here that I really don't agree with Cleve on. One of them comes from this quote where he says, "Of course, the vast majority of gay and lesbian people have never consciously participated in any of these discussions regarding, politics. They don't read social theory, enroll in gender studies program, or attend political conferences." I don't think all LGBTQ plus people need to be doing that. But there are some people within the community, a lot of people, that do like doing that kind of stuff. They do like the activism part. They do like going to the marches more than going to the bars. They do like going to the political conferences more than the prides. And we need those people, because those are the people that are fighting for our rights. Here's where I think there's a gray area, where I go to these marches and I try to educate myself as much as possible on LGBTQ politics and legislation and everything that's happening, especially now. And I know so many people that do not, and that just like going to the gay bars and drinking and just having fun and dancing and doing those kind of things. I'm okay with that. It took me a long time to fully understand and be okay with that, because I'm like, why are you not fighting with us? Why are you having the benefits of everything that we are doing without doing any of the work? But I don't think that way anymore, because like I mentioned, there are the people in the queer community that are better at that, or that like doing that like the activism more, that like educating people and learning as much as they can. We are fighting for the queer community to just exist, to be able to thrive, to be able to do what they want to do. So if they just want to go to the bars, or they want to just have fun in the queer culture but don't want to do the activism stuff, I think that's fine, because not everybody wants to do that. I don't think anybody wants to do that, but we have to do that. When it comes down to the voting and the bigger marches, that's when we need everybody. I guess we could benefit from always having everybody, but I see myself as, I want to fight for the rights of queer people to just go to the bars and drink and be themselves. Sorry, I'm getting all passionate and a little emotional because of this book, and I don't know if a lot of this is making sense. Overall, what I'm trying to say is that I'm happy to fight for queer rights to do nothing. I'm happy to fight for people to take for granted that we can go to queer bars. I'm happy to fight for people to take for granted everything that the queer community has. I know that sounds kind of backwards because we should always appreciate the history of our community, but we always say that, wow, this generation has it easier than the last one. But that's the goal. We always want the next generation to have it easier than we had it. I know the people before us that had to deal with the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and they're saying now we have HIV medicine and hopefully soon a cure, and they had lost so many people during that time, whereas we take for granted that we have an LGBTQ center that we can go to and get tested regularly. I think that's an incredible thing, and I want to leave the next generation with even more. That's how everybody should be looking at that. The last sentence in the book is one of my favorites. Cleve writes, "My generation is disappearing. I want the new generations to know what our lives were like, what we fought for, what we lost, and what we won." That's incredibly important. And that's only going to come with teaching queer history, whether that's in schools, whether that's through YouTube videos, whether that's through books like this. It's important to read about our history. Reading this book, it gets me incredibly emotional because there's been so much work that's been put into the queer community, and I think even myself, I do take a lot of it for granted because I don't know what it was like before, and I can't imagine how difficult it was before this generation. We have our own struggles now, and things are hard now, but they're different struggles. We had to start somewhere, and it was people like Cleve Jones and Harvey Milk that helped us along the way and made things better for the next generation. I recommend this book to pretty much anyone that wants to learn about queer history. This is something that should be taught in history classes, especially queer studies, because it's so foundational of the activism that had to be done to get to where we are today. I highly recommend this book if you're really getting into activism or want to start getting into it, especially now during the second Trump administration. This is the book for you. This is a good book to start with. There's plenty of extra resources in it, so it'll lead you to other books and other people to check out, other events. This is definitely a foundational book that I recommend for any queer person and any straight ally.